In this series on spiritual leadership, we've been considering the common shortcomings of leaders, the common failures or mistakes that we as leaders make. We said the first one is that we forget to lead. The second one is that we forget to follow. Today I'd like to talk about the third common shortcoming, and that is of over control. It's when we misuse our position of leadership and authority to control over or dominate people's lives. Now, the essence of spiritual leadership is servant leadership as modeled by Jesus. And Jesus said he did not come to be ministered unto, but to minister. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. That's the essence of spiritual leadership. Now, people that most commonly make this mistake of over control are usually young leaders or leaders that are insecure in their role, and they try and make up for their insecurity with rules and regulations. Now, you can't legislate for your insecurity. If you are sure you're God's leader, you'll be secure. If you're not sure, you need to make sure so that you can be secure in God's calling and God's anointing upon your life. John Maxwell, he says that leadership is essentially influence. Leadership is one person influencing another. If you can't influence people to follow you, then you better not legislate or force them to follow you, because forced control just breeds discontentment and rebellion, especially in a spiritual realm. If you're a spiritual leader, you can't force people, for example, to pray or to fast or to do things that you are not willing to do. If you can't influence people to pray with you or to fast alongside with you and that kind of thing, then it won't help to making rules and regulations to lay that upon people in a strict way. Don't control people through rules, but serve people or lead people through influencing them. Another very important principle of spiritual leadership is that we as spiritual leaders don't have the right to control the details of people's lives. It's a privilege to be involved in people's lives, but it's not a right. I was shocked the other day when a friend of mine told me that he was teaching some young people on how to hear the voice of God and how to know and discern the will of God for their lives. And afterwards, one of the moms of one of the young lads said, you don't need to go to those teachings about the will of God, because one day your pastor will tell you what job you need to do, where you need to live, and who you will marry. Now, that's completely a misconception. As spiritual leaders, we don't control those details of people's lives. It's a privilege to be involved and influence and pray alongside people in terms of what choices they should make in terms of their careers and their marriage and that kind of thing. But if you are controlling those details of people's lives, you're out of line, and that's not representing the spiritual leadership that Jesus came to represent. In Hebrews 5, verse 1 and 2, it talks about the high priest that has been called from amongst men and appointed by God in the affairs of God. Now, we as spiritual leaders are in that priestly role. Hebrews 5 verse 2 says this: He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. Those of us that are in a priestly role, we should be able to deal gently with people that are going astray, because we ourselves are prone to weakness. Now, a domineering or authoritarian leader will lead through his strengths and will ignore or hide his weaknesses. A servant leader will lead through the grid of his weakness. Now, if you hide your weaknesses and you only lead through your strengths can actually become your weaknesses. Now, let me talk about this principle of leading through the grid of your weakness. Leading through your weakness. For example, I am pastorally motivated. I have a motivation of mercy and compassion. And I'm not very strongly prophetically motivated in terms of justice, that which is right or that which is wrong. So, for example, if I was leading a church or leading a mission organization and we had various policies to run the organization smoothly. For example, one, you don't use the ministry's vehicle for personal use. It's meant for ministry use. And someone came to me and they asked, could I please use the missions vehicle to take my parents on holiday for the weekend? Now, my strength of mercy and compassion would want to say yes, because that's the way I'm motivated. But I have to run that decision through the grid of my weakness, which is to uphold the policy, to be just and to be righteous. And then I have to say, no, there's a policy. I can't let you use the missions vehicle. I can't do that. But the way I communicate it is through the strength of compassion. And I'll say, for example, now you know that you can't use the vehicle, but I'll tell you what, if you take care of the insurance and you fill my vehicle up with fuel, then you're welcome to use my personal vehicle for the weekend. What I've done there, I've been aware of my weakness, but I haven't neglected my strength to be compassionate and merciful. Now, you might be motivated the other way around. You might be prophetically motivated. Something's right or something's wrong, person's in or person's out. And the way you communicate decisions in terms of being just, you have to communicate it through your weakness of being merciful and compassionate. You have to be aware of that. Otherwise, you're going to dominate or over control and come across very harshly. In closing, let me encourage you that we as spiritual leaders become secure in our calling and our anointing, that we are aware of our strengths as well as our weaknesses, that we run our leadership through the grid of our weaknesses, and that we deal gently with those that we are leading, because we realize that we are also prone and subject to weakness. May God bless you. Here are some questions to consider. Number 1, have you been guilty of over-control to compensate for your own insecurity? Number 2, are you sure of your leadership call? If not, make sure. Number 3, are you aware of both your strengths and your weaknesses? Number 4, are you running your leadership through the grid of your weaknesses, or are you allowing your strengths to dominate?